And our guest is Abel Romero, and Abel works for the Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance, which is an organization in Washington, D.C. And Abel, we'd like to welcome you to the show.
Thank you.
Yes.
And we bring Abel here because Abel is a former student at McMurry University, graduated in 2012, and joined the Missile Alliance, the Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance, about 3 years ago.
Almost 3 years ago now.
And he actually was on this show about a year ago,
Yes.
talking about missile defense. So there has been a lot of stuff that's taken place in the last year since we've seen him. So I think it'd be great to get an update. If anybody has any questions on missile defense, national security, Abel's the guy to talk to. And so just so glad you're here, Abel.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Abel, let me ask you a couple of questions to get us reacquainted
Absolutely.
with you. Where was home?
Home was originally Hamlin, Texas.
Hamlin.
Absolutely. I graduated high school in 2006 and started McMurray that August. So
Yes. And then you finished at McMurry.
I finished in 2012 and then moved to Washington, D.C. to get my master's degree.
And where were you doing that?
I was doing that at Missouri State's Department of Defense and Strategic Studies. They have a satellite campus out in Fairfax, Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C.
And did you finish that degree?
I did, yes. I have a master's degree now in Defense and Strategic Studies.
Yes. And then you're with this company where the emphasis was on missiles.
Missile defense, specifically, yeah.
Missile defense.
Absolutely. Trying to protect us from incoming missiles.
Well, and that's an important one because there's a country over in the Pacific
Absolutely.
that is testing missiles
At an alarming rate.
and says they want to develop one that can hit the United States.
They've been making that threat for some time now, and this year, in fact, they've tested more than any other year since they began their program in the late 90s.
Yeah, we're talking about is North Korea.
North Korea, yes.
Yeah, it's like we've been afraid to say it. Now, we need to emphasize the Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance that you work for, Abel, is a nonprofit organization.
Nonprofit organization.
It is not a government agency.
Right.
You don't have government clearance or anything, do you?
I don't. No, everything I do is open source information about these systems. Our primary mission is to educate the American public about why we need them and why it's important to have them in place today.
And they just published, your first book.
Yes,
And you're the co-author of a book, and it's basically a primer
absolutely.
on missile defense. And what's the book called?
It's called U.S. Ballistic Missile Defense. It's an overview of current and future ballistic missile defense capabilities. It's about 80 pages long, sort of an encyclopedia, like you said, a primer about missile defense capabilities. It has enough information about the systems we have in place today, both the intercept systems and the sensor systems, as well as future ballistic missile defense capabilities.
Now, let me put you on the spot a little bit.
Sure.
Because when you were at McMurry, I don't remember that this was a driving force in your life.
It was not, no. I kind of fell into this, yeah. When I came to Washington, D.C., I actually took one of my first classes was on missile defense policy. So I took a class on that for a semester and learned a lot about the capabilities. And I eventually ended up with my organization now as a graduate fellow. So I worked there for some time until I moved into a permanent position as the Director of Government Relations there.
But national security was a driving force for him when he was a student
Yes.
in the political science program. I remember very, very well
Absolutely.
having conversations with Abel, saying this is something he'd like to do at some point.
Absolutely,
So,
yes.
and he's managed to do it really well.
And you talked to Dr. Fabrizio's political science class today.
I did speak with them today, and that was a lot of fun, yeah. We talked about these systems, particularly focused a little bit on homeland missile defense, why that's important, some of the evolution of that program, which is a big conversation in Washington at the moment right now as well. So we spoke with them about that, as well as some of the other capabilities that we have in place and why they're important.
Now, I thought it would be interesting if we could get your perspective on a couple of different countries and what kind of relationship / threat
Sure.
they are to the United States. So, Bill, you brought up earlier North Korea.
Yes.
So let's talk about North Korea.
Right.
At the beginning of this year, they tested a nuclear device that may have been a hydrogen bomb. Was it a hydrogen bomb? Do we know?
So far, any indication that we have hasn't been exactly conclusive about whether or not it was a hydrogen bomb or a more powerful conventional, more powerful uranium weapon. But I think the story is the fact that this is their fourth overall test of a nuclear device. And it might possibly be a different miniaturized device to allow them to place that weapon on a missile itself, which would be a pretty major development in their program overall. And that was at the beginning of the year. That was shortly followed by a test of one of their rockets, which would be a long-range capability, potentially able to reach the homeland United States. Marrying those two capabilities together would be a significant threat to U.S. Homeland Security.
Do they have a long-range missile that they have tested that can reach the United States?
So far, they haven't tested what military officers call an end-to-end capability. We haven't seen
end-to-end?
End-to-end, meaning they haven't tested a missile that was designed to be a missile from launch to completion of all the components required to develop an actual missile. So besides being able to reach space, they also have to be able to have that weapon re-enter the atmosphere in order to reach the United States. And so far, those capabilities haven't been tested that we've seen.
Okay. Do they have shorter range missiles that could reach Alaska, Hawaii?
None of their shorter range capabilities, land-based capabilities, are able to reach any of our territory at the moment. However, they are developing intermediate and medium range missiles that could potentially reach other U.S. territories like Guam. Their Musadon missiles, they've tested a number of those this year to varying degrees of success, and those are potentially capable of reaching a very important military facilities in Guam that the United States has been relying heavily on to help us defend in the Pacific.
Yeah, and right now, their capability is South Korea, China, Japan. And parts of Russia.
Possibly, yes. Mm-hmm. So they do have in their inventory today those kinds of capabilities to certainly reach our allies in the Pacific.
Have they put a nuclear weapon on a missile yet?
We've not seen them do that yet. That's part of their inability to demonstrate, at least, that they've developed a warhead that they're able to miniaturize to marry to a missile of any range. Mm-hmm. So that is one thing we're looking closely to watch, to whether or not we see any indication that they develop that capability.
Part of the confusion has to do with whether the driving force behind this development is this strange president they have,
absolutely,
or whether it's the head of the military itself. Mm-hmm. Because he has removed so many military
absolutely.
People at various times.
And that's part of our lack of intelligence on the Korean leadership in general, North Korean leadership in general. In years past, as we discussed in our class, North Korea has used their nuclear and ballistic missile capabilities in an attempt to coerce the United States and our allies into giving them aid or other things like that. This year, despite all of the tests that they've conducted, they've yet to ask for anything. It seems that their end goal is to develop these capabilities and not attempt to coerce the international community into working with them for any other means other than developing a military capability.
So they want to be a nuclear power, it seems like, rather than they need food.
Right, absolutely.
And before it seemed like they wanted food.
Yes.
Now they want to be a power. Okay,
right.
We need to take a break.
Yes, we do. This portion, we have a special guest with us today, Mr. Abel Romero, a McMurry graduate, who actually is from Hamlin, which is not very far away, but he is with a private security firm in Washington, D.C.
Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance.
Yes.
And it focuses on educating lawmakers and the public about missile defense, and Abel's job is Director of Government Relations for this organization. And he's been with them for 3 years.
Very close.
So we were talking earlier before the break about North Korea, and you said that this year there's in essence been a big change. They're doing more frequent testing,
Right.
and they aren't linking their missile nuclear testing to specific demands for food or anything else. It seems that their focus is really just on becoming a nuclear power.
Absolutely, yeah. They focused entirely this year, it seems, on developing a military capability.
But on the other hand, their economic situation is still so far behind. They still need food so badly.
Absolutely.
They have one of the largest percentages of prisoned citizens in the world, and they have people starving to death,
Right.
and they have limited medical care.
And despite that, they're still spending a significant amount of their national income on developing military capabilities, specifically to help deter the United States of any potential issues with their country there. So.
Okay, let's turn to another country then that obviously has been in the news about missiles and nuclear weapons, and that's Iran. The United States and Iran reached a nuclear deal last year, and in essence, if we believe the administration, it has delayed, put on hold their development of nuclear weapons for 10 to 15 years. Am I correct so far?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Does Iran have missiles that could deliver nuclear weapons?
The nuclear deal that we signed with Iran did not impact at all their ballistic missile program. They are free to continue to develop those. There are some restrictions. They are encouraged to not develop ballistic missile capabilities. Despite that, they still tested some of their missile capabilities earlier this year as well. So the work on that continues despite any limitations they have on enriching uranium, which is sort of the source of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that we signed with them, with this
At the
administration.
same time, there are still countries in the Middle East, like Israel and Turkey, that are concerned about the capability of the missiles they currently
Absolutely,
have.
absolutely. Even a conventional weapon that does not have a nuclear capability married to it would still be a major concern for any of their allies, any of the American allies in the region that are within range of Iran's nuclear missile forces.
So is Iran, with this deal, an immediate threat to the United States?
Less so than North Korea, but I would still maintain that they are within that range of a country that we should be concerned about, and certainly do whatever we can to prevent their further developing of military capabilities.
At the same time, we are closer friends with Saudi Arabia,
Yes.
and certainly the Saudis are concerned about those missiles
Absolutely.
in Iran.
One of the first things that President Obama did after signing the deal was to travel to the Middle East and meet with the members of the Gulf Cooperative Council to talk specifically about missile defense, working closely with our allies there to more jointly work to prevent any missile attacks on either Saudi Arabia or any of the allies in the Middle East. So that was definitely a top priority for the president after signing that agreement.
And we're back with you, Professor Bill Libby and Professor Paul Fabrizio, and our guest for the day, Mr. Abel Romero, who is with a missile defense agency, private, nonprofit, in Washington, D.C. Now, I wanted to ask you a different kind of question.
Absolutely.
And that is, how are you related to our own military defense system, and how do you talk with them?
We do work closely with both the military and the Missile Defense Agency that develops these capabilities for the military. We primarily deal with them in terms of, again, our mission is education primarily, so we learn from them and sort of pass along their messages, whatever they might need.
But who are you educating?
My job is to talk with the United States Congress. So I go to Capitol Hill about once a week and talk with congressional staffers, primarily, again, on missile defense policy itself. We stay out of the business end of the politics and things like that. So it's not my job to try to sell Congress on the systems necessarily, trying to get them to invest in those. It's mostly to talk to them about why we need these in general and things like that. So we do work closely with the military, mostly with public outreach efforts. One of the things that we do is host events really around the world focused on the war fighters themselves, what they do, why it's important. We call them the Defender of the Year award ceremonies. We usually recognize service members, both American and allied, that work on missile defense capabilities to let people know what they do and why it's important. We also host events with members of Congress around the country. Just last week we had an event with Senator John McCain and the director of the Missile Defense Agency, Admiral Jim Searing, was there as well to talk a little bit about some of the capabilities that are actually built in Arizona. So that's part of what we do, as well as to educate people on that.
And was that meeting in Arizona or
It was.
in Washington?
It was in Arizona.
All right. Out on McCain's home ground.
Absolutely. And we do have a number of congressional roundtable discussions as well, where we bring experts from the military or other parts of the missile defense community to talk to members of the Congress about a number of topics. We just recently had one on missile defense in Europe, and at the beginning of the year, we had one on the North Korean ballistic missile threat. So, a number of timely topics to talk with members of Congress about that, sort of a larger setting.
Okay. Now, let me ask you a question. We've talked about North Korea, Iran, Russia, but in my class this afternoon, I asked you if you look 20 to 30 years in the future, who would be our number one threat? And you said China.
Absolutely.
What is our relationship missile to missile with China? Where do they stand in all this, and can we protect ourselves from them?
Currently, China's strategy is focused on developing what the military calls anti-access and area denial capabilities.
Can you say that a little slower so we can all get it?
Anti-access area denial. It's capabilities designed to keep the United States out of their backyard, essentially. They're developing sophisticated standoff weapons like missiles to threaten American assets like aircraft carriers. They're developing a missile called the DF-21, specifically designed to try to destroy U.S. aircraft carriers. The United States relies heavily on those to project power forward, specifically in the Pacific. So that is largely what their focus is on today, is developing those kinds of weapons to keep us out of their region.
Okay, and their region would be the South China Sea?
They consider that to be their region, yes. The international community largely does not. But part of that is part of their larger strategy. They want to control that area in order to forward deploy some of these capabilities, like their fighter jets, any other air or missile defense capabilities, to keep the United States further and further away from their territory.
Yeah. At the same time, though, only a few years ago, President Obama was emphasizing we're making a shift from
Right.
the Middle East to China or to Asia. And that creates some difficult moments.
Absolutely. Yeah, the Obama administration has always maintained that we are supportive of a peaceful, rising China. But despite that, we have been focusing more of our military capabilities to ensure that they don't overstep their boundaries, which they've largely been doing in the South China Sea.
Yes.
And it's a consensus within the international community, especially our allies in the Pacific, who are very concerned with China's actions, developing artificial islands and placing military capabilities in their backyards, like the Philippines or South Korea or Japan. A number of these countries will be largely affected by China's militarization of the South China Sea.
How do you see this developing? I mean, in other words, what you're saying is that China is developing the capability to keep us out of certain areas around China.
Right.
We have allies there who want us there.
Yes.
We want us there.
Absolutely.
What do you see happening here?
We're kind of seeing right now a number of allies are increasingly working more with the United States. South Korea is working much more closely with the United States, and Japan as well. with Japan, we're developing joint capabilities cooperatively. Within the missile defense community, we're developing a missile interceptor in which Japan and the United States have co-developed at a cost sharing of 50-50, which is hopefully a model for future cooperation with our other allies as well. South Korea, we recently decided to deploy one of our own capabilities to the region, specifically to look at Chinese, North Korean threats. But that came with a Chinese objection. Despite that, our alliance has been strong enough to go ahead and deploy that system, despite the objection from China.
So we are developing missile defenses in response to the Chinese development.
Specifically the North Korean. But those kind of cooperation and working with our allies are certainly paths forward for potentially mitigating any Chinese threats in the future. Alliances will be a major factor in dealing with China, not only militarily, but diplomatically as well.
Well,
So go ahead.
in recent weeks, it appears that Japan is doing some new emphasis on militarization.
Absolutely.
Because for many years after World War II, they had backed away.
Absolutely.
But under the current government, they appear to be building up. Is that in response to China?
Absolutely. Japan has, as you mentioned, after World War II, they largely stayed away from offensive military capabilities and specifically focused on defensive forces. All of their military forces are called Japanese Defense Self-Defense Forces. But now they're moving away from that and looking more closely at other capabilities as well to help offset the threat from China. So they have made a pretty significant shift in their own defense policy, specifically looking towards China.
So it doesn't appear, from your perspective, that the United States or the Allies are retreating in the face of China.
Absolutely not, no.
Then what is the Chinese goal? What do they want in the end?
They certainly want to be a regional power, potentially a global power, but certainly within the larger Pacific region, they do want to be the number one power to control primarily the region, the seas within their own territory. And they certainly want to be able to act with impunity in that area without any restrictions from the United States or its allies in terms of...
But the South China Sea is not traditionally a part of China. It is claimed by so many different areas, so many different countries, and they are actually moving into the area.
Absolutely, yeah. A number of countries claim ownership of the islands within the South China Sea. And China has been rapidly moving into those areas as well and claiming that territory as their very own, and claim to have had ownership and control of that territory for some time.
Do you think that China would be willing to fight one of these countries or the United States over this?
It's within the realm of possibility for sure. But again, with the United States building alliances with a number of these countries, the risk of conflict for China goes up significantly, and they certainly don't want to, any more than we do, risk an outright war within the region, which is making it a very difficult situation for all involved, obviously.
Wow. Now,
Yes,
we
it
didn't
is.
even have time to get into the fact that your organization is advising politicians, people running for office, including presidential candidates, but we won't talk about that, and working with members of Congress on all these issues that go forward. Is this, are you optimistic about the future of missile defense in this country?
Missile defense?
And we've got less than 30 seconds,
Yes.
so you got to give a 10-second answer.
Yes, I mean, it's made a complete 180 from where we were 10 years ago when missile defense was politically contentious. Today, it's a tool we use to reassure our allies around the world, and it's something that we will only see continue to develop.
Okay, our thanks to Abel Romero
Yes,
of the Missile
thank you very
Defense
much.
Advocacy Alliance. We really appreciate being
Thank you.
here. Tomorrow, Bruce Kreitler is going to be here to talk about Abilene City Council and their budget.